Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I am bringing you my best books of 2019. I'm super excited, a little overexcited because I have almost 20 books to show you guys, but 2019 was an amazing reading year for me. I read a lot. I'm hoping, this is the 31st of December tonight, I am hoping to read 110 books this year. I'm at 109 and I've got one novella I'm hoping to finish. So I read a ton and I liked the majority of the books that I read. I was so pleased with my reading this year. I discovered a number of great new authors. I found some new series. I started finishing series, which is very exciting and new for me. And I just had the best reading year, a really great year. So I wanted to show off my best books of 2019. A couple things before we start. First of all, grab a cup of tea or something because this is probably going to be a bit of a long video. I have a lot of books to show you and I will try to keep it short, but when I get excited about stuff, I tend to ramble and just freak out about how much I love things. So there's that. Also, these are going to be in no particular order until the end when I am going to announce my top 3 books of 2019. So there's no real rhyme or reason to this except for the very end, which I'll say when we get there. And also a lot of these books were sent to me for review by publishers. However, that doesn't impact my opinion on the books whatsoever. Oh, and one more thing. I have done full reviews for a couple of these books. Not a lot of them, but a couple of them. So when that is the case, I will go ahead and link the review to that book down below. And I will also link my best books of 2018 down below as well, so you guys can check out what I loved from last year. The video quality I don't think is very good, so forgive me. I got a new camera for Christmas last year. But if you are curious about what I've loved in the past, then you can go ahead and check that out too. Alright, so we're gonna start this list real strong with the Green Bones Saga by Fonda Lee. So this is Jade City and Jade War. You have probably heard me talking about these books a lot this year. I read Jade City, I believe, in June, and I read Jade War, I think in August, maybe August or September, and they are fantastic books. I am so glad that I ended up reading these. I'd had Jade City on my shelf for a year or so and had never picked it up until it was recommended to me on Twitter, actually, and it's just a phenomenal series. So the series is often described as The Godfather meets kind of old school kung fu movies, which I think is great and is accurate, but I think that for me, the joy of these books is really the characters, because the characters are absolutely incredible, absolutely amazing, and the world building is just astonishing. There's something about these books and how intricate her world building is and how just incredible they are that really makes it feel like you're reading historical fiction of a place that actually exists rather than fantasy fiction. So if you're interested in reading some really solid fantasy, East Asian inspired fantasy, you can't go wrong with these. They are so incredibly good, and I think that these will really appeal to a huge number of fantasy readers and non-fantasy readers. Next up, I have another series, and this is actually a complete series, and I finished the last book only a few days ago, and it's just incredible, absolutely astonishing. This is the Wounded Kingdom series by R.J. Barker. So we start with Age of Assassins, then we have Blood of Assassins, and finally King of Assassins is the last book. And these are so wonderfully clever because not only is he's an amazing writer and he is a really strong writer, especially for writing his characters. His women are amazing, especially because he tends to write older women really well. The sort of master assassin Marilla in these books is one of my favorite characters ever. But he has this amazing way of kind of twisting tropes and your expectations. So the series takes place in a land that has been kind of drained by sorcerers and magic in the past, and therefore magic is kind of is viewed as this very dangerous thing, and people are literally put to death for being magic users. So we have our main character named Girton in the first book. He is quite young. I think he's a teenager in the first one, and then he grows up and he's, I think, in his 30s in the last one. But he is training to be an assassin, and he and his master are called to the castle and sort of hired on by the queen in order to protect the heir to the throne, who is a nightmare. He's absolutely awful. So he has to kind of go in disguise and sort of play the role of being a young nobleman's son, and people really don't take him seriously because he has a club foot, and it's very much kind of a fighting society where sort of your physical prowess is really, really prized. However, he is amazing at all of the things that he does. He is super underestimated, and it's so wonderfully satisfying to see him just twist people's expectations of him. These books are so good. They are just one of the best sort of full story arcs and full character arcs I've ever read. So I cannot recommend these more highly. So weirdly, the next book is actually my only YA book in this stack. I think that is partially because I did go through a big YA slump for most of the year, and I'm getting it back now, but I only have one YA book in my best books list, and it is just an incredible book. This is All the Bad Apples by Moira Fowley Doyle. She is an Irish writer, and her books tend to be set in Ireland, and this is a fantastic sort of contemporary set magical realism type book. So there's a lot going on in All the Bad Apples. Basically, we start the story on our main character, Dina's birthday, and she accidentally comes out to her sister and her very religious father, and also they find out that their eldest sister, named Mandy, has committed suicide and she has died. However, Dina doesn't believe that Mandy did actually commit suicide. She thinks she's still alive, and she follows this kind of trail of clues that Mandy has left her, and it investigates their family history, because the women in their family who kind of deviate from the norm, who are considered bad apples, all meet with a terrible end. So there's an element of kind of magic and magical realism. All of her writing is really sort of dreamlike, and it's a little bit surreal, but it also investigates being a queer woman in Ireland. And this book will make you so angry. It will make you rage. If you are a feminist, you must give this book a try if you are interested in sort of women's rights and investigating the wrongs that women have had to deal with in the past. This is a just incredible book. I loved it. The next book that I have on my list is one that was super hyped, super hyped in the sort of first half of the year. And for me, it very much lived up to the hype and it surpassed my expectations. I loved this book so much. This is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So Taylor Jenkins Reid wrote another book called The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is like a huge book here on BookTube. And people seem to like fight over which of these two books they like better, and I actually preferred Daisy Jones and the Six. I thought it was a much better book, I thought it had much better characters, and it was just more interesting for me. I love Evelyn Hugo, but Daisy Jones and the Six was just absolutely mind-blowingly incredible for me. So this book is sort of basically an interview transcript. We have a journalist who is interviewing the members of this band, Daisy Jones and the Six, who were a huge success in the 70s and then mysteriously broke up and no one knows why. So what makes that really interesting is the fact that you have all these different people telling you the same event from their own perspective. So, you know, someone will be in the same room and see, say, someone get into a fight with someone else, and they'll be thinking, oh, well, it happened for this reason. Then you'll get the perspective of one of the people who's fighting, and it'll, you know, be for this reason. They'll be completely different things. People will view the same events through different lenses, and it's absolutely fascinating. I love this, and I am a huge, like, 70s rock kind of person, and I also grew up in Los Angeles, and this kind of, a lot of the story centers on Los Angeles and the music scene, so it very much spoke to me. I loved this. I thought that of all the super hyped books of 2019, this is the best one and the one that really lived up to all of the buzz. The next book on the list is the most recent addition to one of my absolute favorite series ever. This is In an Absent Dream by Shauna Maguire. This is the 4th book in the Wayward Children series. So all of the books in the series sort of branch off from the very first book. So in Every Heart a Doorway, we have a character named Lundy, who was one of my favorites, and this is her backstory. This is Lundy's story, and the events that led her to the place that she's in the very first book. So we follow this young girl in the 1960s, and she goes through a doorway, as all of these children do, and she finds herself basically in the goblin market. And I loved this so much. This is probably my favorite of all 4 of these books because I love the goblin market setting. I love Lundy as a character. I thought that she as a character is different and interesting in a way that the others don't necessarily have, so it doesn't feel like a rehashing of all of the same stories over and over and over again. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. I don't want to say too much because it's a novella. It's really, really short. But if you haven't read these books, they're absolutely wonderful. They're all about the children who go through portals to new worlds, fall down the rabbit hole, and have to come back, and they have to sort of figure out how to live in the real world again. They're just wonderful. They're so good. 5th one's due out in January or February, and I'm so excited. Next up, we have one of 2 science fiction books on this list. I didn't read a lot of sci-fi this year, but the ones that I did read were particularly excellent. So it's no surprise to anyone, I'm sure, that Atlas Alone by Emma Newman is on my list. So this is another 4th book in another of my favorite series, and this series is absolutely wonderful. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think that she has this incredible talent for writing really interesting, complicated women, and I've never read female characters like hers before. I particularly liked the character in this book, Dee, and this is one of the only books in the series so far that is a direct continuation, a direct sequel of one of the previous books. So this is book 4. And this is a direct sequel to book 2, which is called After Atlas. And I don't want to say too much, but basically our character Dee, who is a side character in After Atlas, finds herself in this new situation, and she has to not only navigate this new situation, but she also realizes that something is terribly wrong, and she begins to investigate. Dee is someone who very much lives through gaming and kind of the virtual reality gaming of this particular world. And through that gaming, Emma Newman had the chance to really expand upon the really fascinating aspects of this particular world. So in the Planetfall books, the government has kind of collapsed, and there's this new GovCorp basically that has taken over. Basically corporations rule, and she gets to investigate how that happened. There are things called the London riots that she refers to in other books. We get to see the London riots in this, and it's just absolutely fascinating. If you like science fiction with mental health rep, she is one of the best writers for that. She is not only a wonderful person, I love Emma Newman. She's not only a wonderful person, she's a fantastic writer, and her books are so meaningful to me. So this was no exception. I loved it. I can't wait for whatever she comes out with next. The next book that I have is a grimdark book, and I love grimdark, and I think that this is genuinely one of the best books that the subgenre has to offer. This is Priest of Bones by Peter McLean. I went into this book fully expecting to like it, because a lot of my friends who enjoy grimdark really, really like this book, but my mind was blown by how much I enjoyed this book. So basically we follow a character named Thomas Piety, and he is a former soldier, and he's coming back from this horrible, horrible war. And he and his men are coming back. They get to the city that he has lived in all his life and realizes that all of his businesses have been taken over. So Thomas Piety he calls himself a businessman. He's a gangster. And he sees that all of his businesses are taken over, things have changed so much, and he decides he's going to take everything back. And it is so good. It's really satisfying in a lot of ways. It's a fantastic read. I really appreciate the way that he handles a lot of the sort of darker content of this book. That's not to say that it's not dark. There's some dark stuff in this one. However, I thought that he handled the sort of darker content of this book with a lot of delicacy, and I really appreciated that. This book has a ton of content warnings. It's in my Goodreads review, which you can go ahead and check out. My Goodreads is linked down below. It's just fantastic. I think that if you are new to grimdark, it might not necessarily be the best place to jump in. However, if you are familiar with the genre, you must pick this book up because it is so good. Next up, we have another book that took me by surprise, because again, I expected to like it. I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. This is Blood of an Exile by Brian Nasland. Here's my terrible fantasy fan fact. This is changing a little bit, but I actually don't particularly enjoy dragons in my books because I feel like they have been done again and again and again, and they're kind of boring to me at this point. However, Blood of an Exile handled dragons in a really fascinating way, and I absolutely loved it. This book follows a character named Bershund, and he is a dragon slayer. Basically, he is an exiled lord. He committed some terrible crime in the past that we don't know about, and he has been sentenced to become a dragon slayer. And if you are a dragon slayer, you're basically a social outcast. You don't stay at inns, you don't get offered, you know, beds and food and comfort and everything. You're kind of scraping by, and you're very much expected to die very quickly because you're trying to slay dragons. However, he has managed to survive for a very unusual amount of time, and he has become kind of this legendary figure. So he is recalled to the capital to face the king who put him into exile in the first place, and everything kind of goes off from there. We have amazing characters in this book. I loved the characters in this, and that was one of the things that really made this work so well for me. Bershund is a great character, but we have this woman named Ashlyn who's kind of his long-lost love, who is the daughter of the king, and she is amazing. She is absolutely incredible. We have this kind of like gang of misfits that he gets together with who are fantastic. It's such a fun book. So when I said that there was only one YA book on this list, I was definitely lying. Sorry, I missed one. This book definitely took me by surprise. This seems to be a theme at the moment, especially given how I felt about the first book. And it continues to take me by surprise because of how I felt about the third book. This is The Wicked King by Holly Black. This is the second book in the Folk of the Air series, which is The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and The Queen of Nothing. And I don't like fae books. They just don't do it for me, really, but I picked up The Cruel Prince because I got it in a fairy loot box, and I blasted through it. I thought it was a huge mess. Not particularly great, but fun, and I loved the ending. And I was like, okay, if the second book, The Wicked King, keeps up the same energy as the ending of The Cruel Prince, I think I'm gonna love it. And I did. This book is mad. It's so much fun. It's murdery and delightful, and I absolutely loved every second of it. This series follows a girl named Jude, and when she was a child, her parents were murdered by her mother's first husband, whose name is Maddock, and he is a redcap. He is a type of fairy. So he kills her parents, takes the three children, one of whom is his full-blooded daughter, into Fairy and raises them kind of as his own. So as Jude and her sisters grow up in Fairy, they're very aware of the fact that they are very different from everyone else around them, and Jude becomes a very hardened, kind of cruel person, and she wants more than anything to be a knight, to be a warrior. And the way that this book sort of veers the narrative into a new direction is so good. It's dark, it's murdery, it's backstabby, it's delightful. I really enjoyed this. I didn't love the other two books in this series, but for me, reading The Wicked King, totally worth it. The next book on my list is one that I am so thankful I finally read. I bought this when it came out in, I think, fall of 2018, and it's been sat on my shelf, and I finally read it this year. I'm so happy I did. This is City of Lies by Sam Hawke. So for me, what makes City of Lies such an amazing book is not just the kind of amazing characters and the fantastic setting and all of this, but it takes two subgenres that I love and smushes them together in a really fantastic way. So our main characters are Jovan and Kalina, and the point of view switches between the two of them. And they are friends of the Chancellor of the city. They are the nephew and niece of the poison tester for the Chancellor of the city, and Jovan is training to take over his uncle's place as the poison tester for his best friend, who is the heir. So the Chancellor and their uncle actually die of poisoning at the very beginning of this book, and in their grief they have to figure out how to not only navigate Jovan's new position, but they have to figure out who murdered them. And at the same time, there are food shipments from the countryside that are not coming in. All of the messenger birds in the city are gone, and they suddenly realize there is an army marching towards the gates of the city, and they don't know who is attacking. So someone on Twitter called this a who sieged it instead of who done it, which is like perfect. It is such a fantastic mystery story. It has two amazing characters. If you're looking for really good representation for OCD and for chronic illness, you must read this book. It's just wonderful. I call this book like Hufflepuff's doing stuff. The Hufflepuffs are the heroes, and that makes me really, really happy. So if you haven't picked up Sam's book, it is so, so wonderful. It feels like it was written by a veteran of the genre, and you can tell how much she loves fantasy with the way that she wrote this and the love and the care that she put into it. I'm obsessed. I love it. The next book on my list is, unsurprisingly, To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. She's one of my favorite authors. If you didn't know, I am a huge Becky Chambers fangirl. I love her. I will read her shopping list. She is amazing. I met her and I didn't cry. It's one of the biggest achievements of my life, and I adored this. I knew I would like it, obviously, but knowing that it was going to be separate from her Wayfarers books, which is her series of science fiction books that she is writing right now, and knowing that it was going to be a novella, I was a little bit nervous, but I should have known that I had no reason to be nervous because this was so good. One of my friends on Twitter described this book as Becky Chambers as fuck, and that is so accurate. If you have read any of Becky Chambers' books, you probably know what I'm talking about. She has this wonderfully gentle way of world building. Her humans in her book are the best that humanity could possibly be, very far from what we are right now, and it's just wonderful. So basically this book is a message back from one of the ships of humans that have gone off to explore years and years ago, and they have a request for us here on Earth. However, in order to ask, they need to tell us the events that have led them to this particular point. So we flash back to them leaving Earth and then visiting these 4 planets, and it's just wonderful. So one of the things that she does, that is Becky Chambers as fuck, is the humans do not terraform these planets. Instead, they essentially terraform themselves to suit the environments of these planets. When they land, they make sure they land somewhere where there is no life that they will be disturbing or destroying, and it's just gentle and it's lovely and wonderful. And I think that this ending will probably divide people. I loved the ending. Again, Becky Chambers as fuck. It was great. Big fangirl. I thought that this was fantastic. She's coming out with another novella sometime in 2020, and then hopefully we'll get more of her Wayfarers books, but in the meantime, if she continues to write stuff like this, I will be very happy. The next book is probably one that you guys are sick of me talking about. If you were here kind of July through September, you're probably really sick of me talking about this book, but I'm going to talk about it again. This is A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. This was so good, which is the least surprising thing in the world because I am also a huge fan of Joe Abercrombie's. We'll also read his shopping list. He's just an incredible, incredible author, and this is a book that I've been looking forward to for a long time because it is a continuation of his First Law world. So this book takes place about 30 years after the events of the First Law trilogy. Then we have some standalone books in there. There's a review of this, I'll post it down below, I talk about that a little bit more. But basically, 30 years later, we see how the world has developed and continued to grow and expand and industrialize, which was great. And it has multiple points of view of different people, all the way from the heir to the throne down to the poorest laborer. And it talks about sort of class and working conditions and industrialization, but also very much sticks with a lot of the themes that he talks about in his other books. So war is a big thing. We get soldiers' points of view. We see characters who are very familiar to us. We see characters who are the descendants of familiar people, and we also get a lot of really great new characters. His books are so funny. They're grim dark, but they are so funny, and the humor balances it out really well. They're so impactful, and he's just a phenomenal writer. So if you are a fantasy fan and you have not picked up Joe Abercrombie yet, consider this being me beating you over the head with this book to make you read him, because he is just fantastic. The next book that I have is The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the sequel to The Poppy War, which was my best book of 2018, and this is an amazing, amazing follow-up. I will not go into what this book is about because spoilers, but if you haven't read The Poppy War, it basically follows a girl named Rin, and she is a war orphan, and she is a peasant, and she is basically going to be forced into this horrible marriage that she does not want. So she ends up taking this incredibly, notoriously difficult exam to get into the premier military academy in her land. And she goes off to school, things are great, brutal but great, and then war breaks out halfway through. I loved the way that she continues to develop Rin's character arc, because Rin's not a particularly nice person. She's kind of awful, but she is such a fascinating person, and you kind of can't help but love her even though she's awful. And I love the development of other characters. I loved her continuation of the relationships between characters that she met in the very first book. I loved her sort of development in terms of magic, and I absolutely loved seeing other countries come into play. I feel like I've said too much already, but this is just such a great book. I absolutely adored it, really loved it, and I cannot wait for the final book next year. Okay, so the time has come for my top 3 books of the year. And if you look at this, you may notice that's not 3 books, that is actually 4. I agonized over the choice of my #1 book of this year, and I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't pick between 2 books. So I actually have a tie for #1. This is my channel. I can do what I want. So I am going to show you my #3, my #2, and my tie for #1. So starting with #3, this is Realm of Ash by Tasha Suri. I cannot tell you how much I adored this book. I have a really difficult time trying to explain my feelings on Tasha Suri's books. I don't know why. I have a really, really difficult time just putting it into words, because for me, a lot of what her books evoke is feelings, emotions, some sobbing sometimes, and the absolute beauty of her writing. Her writing is just incredible, and she is one of the best fantasy authors writing right now. If you haven't read Empire of Sand, the first book, you must hop on it. If you haven't read Realm of Ash yet, you must pick it up. It is wonderful. So this book is more, I would say, like a companion novel to Empire of Sand. It takes place just over a decade probably after the events of the first book, and instead of following Mare, who is our main character in the first one, we follow Arwa, who is her younger sister. And Arwa was about 6 during the first book, and now she is a young woman. I think she's actually in her 20s, so it's a little over a decade. She is a young woman, and she's actually a widow. She is the sole survivor of a Jinn attack on the military fortress that she and her husband were living in. She's the only person who lived. No one knows why except for Arwa. She knows that it is her Emrithi blood from her mother's side of the family that saved her. All of that magic is explained in the first book. And she is sort of not only learning to accept her place as a widow in society, because her society sort of has a box for widows to kind of go in, but she's also coming to terms with her Emrithi blood that her stepmother has told her to fight her entire life. No one can know that she has this blood. But she also is angry. She is full of rage, and she is learning how to kind of channel that. So there's a ton of plot that happens after that. That is the lightest explanation of what this book is about. However, I think that if you go into it and just sort of go with the flow of the story, that's the best way to enjoy it. It's a beautiful book, and her writing is incredible, and the world building is amazing. It's one of my favorite fantasy worlds, but for me, the magic system is one of the most beautiful magic systems I've ever read. A lot of it in the first book is linked to dance, and in this one it is linked to your ancestors. It's just like, oh, it's so fucking good. I feel like I've exhausted all of my good words for these books. They're just wonderful, and I cannot implore you enough to read this. It's just, oh, they're so good. My number 2 book of the year is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. I'm laughing because whereas I feel like I don't have enough words to talk about how much I love Realm of Ash, I feel like I have too many words to talk about how much I love The 10,000 Doors of January. So before kind of launching into what this book is about, do me a favor. Think for a moment what your favorite book as a child was. The one that you, when you think back to your childhood, it's that one you zero in on. Your favorite book to read, you know, with the duvet pulled over your head with your flashlight, or, you know, curled up in a window watching a rainy day or something like that. For me, it's this book called Gwyna. I don't even remember who it's by, but it's basically about a girl who has owl wings, and she has to save her family. And it's beautiful, it's got illustrations. I think of Gwyna. So think of your favorite book. Reading The 10,000 Doors of January, for me, evoked the same feelings and emotions that I get when I think about reading Gwyna as a child. For me, this is the first time that I've ever been able to recapture kind of the magic of reading and the nostalgia from when I was a kid, which is a really amazing thing. And for that reason alone, this book is really special. But in addition to all of that, the characters in this book, especially January, are just wonderful. And the story is wonderful. And this is a book not only for book lovers, but this is a book for all of the kids like me who desperately wanted to go on an adventure, who wanted to, you know, run around with Bilbo Baggins and fight dragons, or, you know, wanted to go off on a pirate ship, or wanted to launch themselves into space. I was a weird kid. But it's just one of those books that really manages to capture the imagination, and I've never read anything quite like this. So that's enough of my rambling about my own feelings. This book follows a girl named January, and she is sort of reflecting on her life, starting from when she's about 7 years old, and she discovers a doorway to another world. She doesn't get to go through it, but it kind of starts this sequence of events in her life. So good. It's a wonderful tale of kind of romance and wonder and adventure, and it's just fantastic. It's such an incredibly good book. Like, y'all read it, please. Okay, so the moment of truth is here. I have a tie for my best book of 2019. And when I read this first one back in January, I knew that it would be my best book of the year. And it was, until September, when I read the second book. And I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to choose between the two. And about 3 weeks ago, I realized I didn't have to choose between the two. I could have a tie. And thank God, because it was killing my brain. So my top books of 2019 are The Gutter Prayer by Gareth Hanrahan and The Bone Ships by R.J. Barker. So let's talk about The Gutter Prayer first. This came out in January of this year. It is his debut novel, and it is freaking great. It is such an incredible book. I loved it. I absolutely flipped my shit for this book. It is not only a great book, incredible writing, absolutely amazing writing, great characters, really fun magic system, really amazing setting, but also it's weird. It's just weird. It's a weird book, and it is probably the only thing like it that I have ever read. And I love fantasy. Fantasy is amazing. It's my favorite genre, but sometimes you can feel like you're reading the same thing over and over and over again. If you've ever read anything like The Gutter Prayer, I don't think I'd believe you. And the fact that it is such a unique book really gives it so much merit, but it is just a phenomenal story. So The Gutter Prayer begins with a heist. We have our three main characters who are breaking into the House of Law, and everything goes terribly wrong. And they get separated and their stories kind of go from there, and we get a kind of greater overarching plot. Amongst all of this, we have gods, we have these incredible fantasy creatures, things called the Crawling Ones, which are basically masses of grey worms in a relatively humanoid shape that wear like cloaks and masks and do magic. And we have the Tallow Men, which are the city's police force, which are men made of wax that have a burning light in their head, and they're ruthless and terrifying. And it's just so good. It's so good. It's quite a long book, I think. It's just over 500 pages, but I blasted through this, and I loved every goddamn second of this book. And I've actually read the sequel now, The Shadow Saint, which comes out on the 9th of January, and it's just as good. It is so good. He's just an incredible writer. This is an amazing world. I love it. Please read this. And finally, we have The Bone Ships. So this is an amazing book. And it's funny because if you're looking for a book that has like lots of plot and everything, I don't think this is the right place for you. But if you're looking for a book that is not only wonderfully atmospheric, but is also an amazing redemption story for a lot of characters and has these wonderful characters, you must read this book. I am someone who grew up near the ocean. I'm from Los Angeles, and the ocean has kind of been part of my life for all of my life. And so I love everything that is set on, in, around, under, wherever the ocean. I've never read anything that evoked the feeling of being near the ocean, being at sea before. It sounds so cheesy. I hate saying this because it makes me feel really cheesy, but it's so true. When you're reading this, you can feel the salt air, you can feel the spray on your face, you can feel the rocking of the ship under your feet. R.J. Barker, as we have discussed before, is just an incredible writer, and he has this wonderful way of just letting you sink into the story. You slip into the story and you just become completely surrounded by the setting, by the characters. And I would look up occasionally just kind of like, you know, confused, being like, it's been 2 hours. I didn't realize that I've been sitting on the sofa reading this for like 2 hours because I was so just invested in the story and I had completely just sunk into the pages of this book. His atmospheric writing is just astonishing. One of my friends on Twitter described this as being an inherently optimistic book, and I think that that is the perfect way of describing it, because although it takes place in a very harsh society, in a very harsh place, this book is, under the surface, haha, a very optimistic book, and it is about redemption and second chances and how one person can sort of redeem themselves. And that's such a beautiful thing. Bone Ships takes place in a society called the 100 Isles, as I'm sure you can imagine. It is a sort of chain of islands, and things like wood, for example, are very scarce. So they build their ships out of these massive dragon bones. They're called bone ships. Again, as I'm sure you can imagine. And they have hunted these sea dragons to extinction, so there are no more bone ships being made, so they are incredibly valuable, and dragon bones are an incredibly valuable commodity. In addition to bone ships, we have black ships, which are essentially ships of the dead. They are dragon bone ships, and they are painted black, and you basically are sentenced, if you're a criminal, to serve on a black ship, and you serve until you die. So, our main character named Joron is the captain of one of these black ships, and we open the story with him basically drunk under a tree trying to avoid all responsibility, and his command is usurped by this woman named Lucky Mayus. And Lucky Mayus is a very prominent figure in their society. She's this kind of legendary sea captain. She's this incredible woman, amazing sailor, amazing fighter, and he doesn't know why she's here. He doesn't know why she's on this black ship, but basically she takes command and they go off and do plot stuff. So not only is this amazing just for the fact that a young man has his command taken by a woman, and he's like, yeah, actually she's probably a lot better at this than I am. He has his moments, but he's, for the most part, like, he serves as her second in command, basically. But also, their relationship is wonderful, is amazing. And as I've said before, RJ's really, really good at writing older women, and also writing platonic relationships between these older women and their male compatriots. I love the relationship between the two of them. I love Mayus. Mayus is like my everything. I love her. I'm completely obsessed with her. She's so cool. And this book is just a treat. It's an absolute delight. I would read this over and over and over and over again. It's so good. And I cannot wait for the second one, which, fingers crossed, I think is maybe coming out in 2020. It's just like, it's just so good, you guys. So that's enough of me fangirling. Those are the best books of 2019 for me. There were a lot of them, but honestly, I read a lot of really good stuff this year, and there were a lot of things that were left off of this list, you know, in the interest of space. So I cannot wait to hear what your best books of 2019 are. Definitely let me know, especially if you've done a video or a blog post. Definitely link it so I can check it out, but also let me know what your favorite books of 2019 were. If you have read any of these books, if they're in your TBR, definitely give me a shout. I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so go ahead and hit subscribe, check back soon, and I will see you next time.